Hello, everybody. My name is Luz Rodriguez. I'm a social protection specialist, work at the World Bank. I'm very happy to be able to moderate this new webinar. This is the fourth webinar of the Social Protection Responses to COVID-19 webinar series. As you may know, this series is a joint effort initiated by the IPCIG, GIZ, on behalf of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Development and Cooperation, BMC, and the Australia Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, in collaboration with socialprotection.org and in cooperation with other partners from different organizations. The webinar series is part of a two-part initiative that has two main components: a collaborative mapping on country news and documents disseminated weekly through a dedicated newsletter, and second, an online community on the topic of COVID-19 to systematize information and foster discussion. We invite you to join the online community Social Protection Responses to COVID-19 Task Force to learn more about the whole initiative, find out how to collaborate, and keep updated about future webinars. And talking about webinars, the next webinars will be on April 16 and April 21st. On April 16, the webinar will be on lessons learned on how to link social protection systems to humanitarian cash in a pandemic. And on April 21st, the webinar will be on impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on employment. Please do not forget to register at socialprotection.org. So let's start our webinar. Can we go to the next one, please? I'm happy to moderate this webinar that is a joint World Bank SIGAP effort, and the presentation today has been prepared for an interdisciplinary team that has been working on identifying ways to improve social protection G2P payments, and also on exploring ways to make them more efficient and customer-centric. Today's presenters are, in order, Douglas Randall, financial sector specialist from the World Bank, who will introduce key aspects for scaling up emergency G2P payments. Then, Verónica Trujillo, Fiorella Rizzo, and Guillermo Galicia from the World Bank Group will share examples of what countries are doing to deploy payments during the COVID-19 pandemic, bringing examples from Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, and Jordan. Finally, Silvia Bauer-Yazbek, financial sector analyst from SIGAP, will summarize success factors for payments delivery in emergencies. So thank you all for agreeing on participating in this webinar. Can we go to the next one, please? So just to set the tone of the discussion, okay. One thing that I want to mention before is that at the end, we will have a Q&A session, and we encourage you to send your questions to the panelists throughout the webinar. We will make all our effort to answer and address all your questions. However, if not feasible, we will prepare a Q&A written document that will be shared in socialprotection.org. Also, if you want to share more information about this webinar, please use your Twitter accounts with hashtag SP.org webinar, SP COVID-19, hashtag COVID-19, and hashtag SP responses. Okay, right now we have 145 attendees, and we are very happy to have your attention today. So let's start just like setting the tone of the conversation. As you know, cash transfers have been always important in the delivery of social protection in general. And now, during the COVID-19 epidemic, at least 80 countries have decided to horizontally or vertically expand cash transfers. In the emergency, two things are needed. One, to get the benefits to the right beneficiaries, and second, to distribute payments in a safe and secure way. Can we go to the next one, please? Next one. The main considerations that we need to take into account when we are designing or implementing emergency G2 payments must take into account that it's important first to minimize agglomerations or crowding at payment points to reduce, of course, the risk of transmission. Second, minimize the cost, direct and indirect, for beneficiaries, making sure that they don't have to travel long distances or they don't have to incur in out-of-pocket expenses to collect their payments. Third, effectively manage operational risk, including the issues of liquidity, security at payment points, and also making sure that there are enough cash out points. One additional factor that not always is being considered is to have clear communication with beneficiaries and also establish right mechanisms for protection of for customer protection at the use of financial services. And finally, guarantee the viability of the model over a long period of time. One thing that we have learned during this crisis is that investing in social protection definitely pays off. The areas of the social protection system that have been neglected end up being a major pain point during the crisis. The operational, regulatory, and infrastructure reforms that made sense prior to the pandemic are even more important now. ID systems, social registries, payment systems are key for the delivery of social protection. However, crises are also an opportunity to rapidly learn what needs to be improved and also to test innovations for the delivery of social protection benefits. So this webinar is an invitation for us to learn what countries are doing, but also for us to reflect on what can be learned from the crisis for long-term improvements in the delivery of social protection benefits. So I will pass over to Douglas, who will start setting the frame.
Thank you, Luz. Hi, everyone. My name is Doug Randall. So before we jump into the country examples, we thought we'd spend a few minutes discussing sort of our overall framework for how we think about this problem and sort of the key areas that require attention. So when we as the World Bank or CCAP are advising governments on how to urgently scale up government-to-person payments, we focus our minds on at least these 12 areas highlighted here in the orange boxes. As we all know, these government-to-person payment ecosystems and models are incredibly complex. They involve everything from policy considerations, strategic considerations, legal regulatory issues, infrastructure issues, operational considerations, communication. So there are multiple potential pain points that, if not addressed, could lead to significant frictions and inefficiencies. So just to briefly summarize, we're going to be talking at least a little bit in this presentation about providers. So who are the providers who are facilitating these payments? Banks, cooperatives, microfinance institutions, non-bank e-money issuers like mobile money providers, all of these potentially have a role to play. What are the access points that are available to beneficiaries who are receiving their payments or want to cash out their payments? So when we say access points, we're talking not only about branches of financial institutions, but also agents, which are often retailers who are representing a financial institution and facilitating cash in, cash out transactions, as well as ATMs. The payments infrastructure refers to sort of the underlying systems, the interbank payment systems, the switches that are actually facilitating the transfer of these payments from government treasury accounts into banks and then into the individual accounts of the beneficiaries. We have two main types of payments that we're going to be talking about. One is an account-based payment, where if you as a beneficiary would receive your payment directly into an account that you might have with a bank or a cooperative or a mobile money provider. The other type is an over-the-counter payment, which is basically when you go directly to a window at a branch or an agent to collect your money in cash without it passing through an account that is your own. A main concern, particularly in a crisis situation such as COVID-19, when we have a huge surge in the number of beneficiaries receiving payments, is liquidity. By liquidity, we mean cash availability. So when you, as a person who is receiving a payment, go to an access point, is there cash available for them to give you? And then how are those providers managing cash to make sure that they can meet the demands of all the beneficiaries showing up? Also on sort of more the social protection side of the equation, we're talking about targeting who is going to receive it. It's not just going to be the same group of people who were receiving government to person payments pre-crisis. How do you communicate to new beneficiaries that they are eligible? You know, we've seen a lot of systems that are decently well designed, but the people who might receive it have no idea if they're eligible. So what do? They turn up to a bank branch, which adds to sort of the chaos and confusion that we're trying to avoid. So clear communication is key. Enrollment is also key, and what are the tools that we can use to help bring people into the system, including online platforms. Authentication we'll talk about in a bit more detail. How do we ensure that the people who are meant to get the money are those that are actually getting the money, and making sure that fraud in particular is not widespread in the system. Consumer protection. In a lot of these cases, we're going to have a lot of people who are participating in the formal financial system without a lot of experience. So it's essential that we ensure that these people have basic consumer protection, so they're treated fairly by financial service providers, so they understand the terms of conditions of a basic account that they might be taking up. And finally, health. I mean, I think rightly so, this was the first point that was highlighted by Luz in objectives. This is not normally a key consideration when we're designing government to payment systems, but in the context of COVID-19, it becomes a paramount concern. We've all seen the pictures of these huge lines at bank branches and cooperatives trying to collect payments. In a normal scenario, a line is inconvenient. We would consider it as an indirect cost. Nobody wants to wait in a line. Of course, in the context of COVID-19, a long line is something significantly more dangerous. And in fact, it's quite counterproductive to be supporting people financially if in order to receive that support, you're putting your health and that of your community at risk. So within these 12 areas, we also need to think structurally about what can be accomplished in the immediate term, in the short term, and then in the medium term. In the immediate term, we're thinking about urgently within 0 to 1 week, what can the government do or an NGO do to quickly increase beneficiary population and facilitate some basic social distancing, sanitation, and security at access points. In the short term, we can be a bit more ambitious. We have a bit more time to plan, within maybe 1 to 6 weeks. How can we shift a larger share of these beneficiaries to account-based transfers and more rigorously systemize these health measures? Then in the medium term, how can we be even more ambitious and overhaul the existing system so that most of these payments, some of which may have been repeated several times, are migrated to the financial system? And how can we strengthen the digital payments ecosystem so that people can use the money they receive in their accounts to buy goods and services directly without cashing out? Okay, so we're going to dive into a few of these a little bit in depth, not all of them, and then we'll get to the country examples where you'll see how these are working in practice. So let's move to the next slide, please. So thinking about providers, and to me, this is sort of the key starting point for designing a scale up of the system. In an emergency situation, a G2P system by its nature will strain existing provider models that are designed initially to accommodate fairly static specific beneficiary groups. So those that are receiving an emergency government to person payment are likely not concentrated in the same geographic areas as G2P beneficiaries pre-COVID-19. They are likely to have different financial behaviors and capabilities, and above all, there's going to be many, many more of them. So if we take as sort of a simple example, a pre-COVID-19 G2P model in which a state-owned bank disperses government-to-person payments to a population of poor rural mothers living in extreme poverty, which is not an atypical situation. This model is simply not going to work when the beneficiary pool is quadrupled or more, and now includes a large share of urban beneficiaries that might already have accounts at different providers. So the access channels of this state-owned bank in a pre-crisis scenario may not even exist in urban areas, and those that do exist in rural areas are likely to be overwhelmed by the massive new numbers of beneficiaries. And again, what we want to avoid is somebody who might have an account with a private bank being forced to go to a public bank to get cash out of the window. So we want to essentially increase the number of providers participating in the system to accommodate the larger and more diverse pool of beneficiaries who are going to be receiving GDP payments in an emergency COVID situation. So that's the long-term goal, to increase the number of providers. So particularly, this is going to be a challenge for countries that had a single provider who was operating their GDP payment system. And what can be done in the immediate term, the short term, and the medium term to grow this pool of providers. So we'll hear some specific examples from Peru and elsewhere of how countries approach this. So in the immediate term, what can you do to bring in some of the largest additional providers, and through those providers, their access channels, their agent networks, their ATM networks, to basically spread the pool of access points and allow people more consumer choice, and to alleviate some of the cash security concerns on each individual provider and access points. So this might require some creative thinking by policymakers to design incentives for these providers. It might require thinking about, can we give, increase transaction fees paid to the providers? Can we give them advance to incentivize quick scale up? Can we get all these providers in a room together to start think about some of the operational and legal barriers that might restrict the entry of more providers? In the short term, growing the pie even larger. Fairly quickly, policymakers should have the goal of including all financial service providers that are willing to disperse GDP payments, that are licensed as financial service providers. That would include banks, cooperatives, microfinance institutions, mobile money providers, and particularly focusing on those with large access point networks. In the medium term, there might be time to implement some emergency regulatory measures to get some more innovative providers, fintechs, digital financial service providers, including social network or e-commerce platforms, to disperse into e-wallets as well. So the goal again is to increase the pool of providers, to expand the choice for consumers, to increase efficiencies in the system, and to make sure that the crowding, the liquidity, the security pressures that a single provider might face are spread across the entire system. Okay, let's move on. Okay, access points, again, by which we mean, branches, agents, and ATMs. Access points are going to be most relevant for those receiving over-the-counter payments, where it's not coming through an account, you're basically going straight to an access point and you're getting your money in cash. Of course, over time, we want to shift away from over-the-counter payments, but they are always going to play a role, particularly in the beginning, where it might be difficult to shift to account-based payments very quickly. So again, the same logic applies. Think of a simple model where a district has one branch. All of a sudden, all of these new people are receiving payments. They all go to the same branch. It's going to be confusing. It's going to be chaos. There's going to be significant health risks for those individuals as well as for their households. So the goal is to increase the pool of access points, to distribute the risk of the risks of security, of health transmission, of crowding, of cash availability across a larger set of financial access points. So a first key role that we've seen a lot of countries do is classify financial access points as essential services in the same way that has been done for grocery stores or for pharmacies, to make sure that these stay open and remain operating for the public. The second is to leverage the full range of financial access points. Many systems are only using branches. In countries where agents exist, this is really key because agents typically tend to be the largest and most widespread type of financial access point. So leveraging them in the system is really critical. There's a bit of a paradox here because some countries may be reluctant to use agents because of liquidity concerns. Basically, they think the agents might not have enough cash, as well as security issues as a result of people crowding in agents. These are legitimate problems and they should be given due consideration, but there's also a certain paradox here. The more you limit the number of access points available, the more those pressures are going to be concentrated on a smaller number of access points. So again, spreading that risk across access points is key. A couple short-term actions to consider: distributing sort of mobile POS devices and mobile hotspots to agents so they can facilitate these cash out transactions. Building a data infrastructure to monitor access points. A lot of small retailers will close. Small retailers may indeed have liquidity issues. So building a data infrastructure to monitor in something close to real time what retailers are open, what retailers have cash, and helping to direct beneficiaries to those specific retailers is something that will be a huge help to sort of reduce these strains. There's other ways to address the cash availability or liquidity issues. including extending no interest credit lines to agents so they can, in advance of the big rush of beneficiaries coming to their store, ensure that they have enough cash on hand to meet the cash out needs. And there's a key role here for agent network managers, which exist in many countries between sort of the bank and the agent, and their specific business model is to manage the operations of the agents, and they can play a significant role in liquidity as well. And then sort of in the more medium term, expanding the functionality of agents so they can also open accounts and have a greater range of permitted activities is important. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so as I mentioned, the goal over time is to shift away from over-the-counter transfers to account-based transfers. This is easier said than done, of course. And I'm a financial inclusion guy. I like it when people have accounts. I think it's important for risk mitigation, for income smoothing, for all sorts of development goals. But financial inclusion itself is not a main priority here. That said, every time you open an account for someone and they can receive the payment directly into their account, that's one less person who's going to the branch. That's one less person who's waiting in line. That's one less person who's straining the access point network and staying at home and sort of being able to practice social distancing. So it's essential to the functioning of this overall system. And as we're seeing now in multiple countries, it's not just the question of a one-time payment. This situation, as we are increasingly understanding, is going to be happening for several months, and it's likely that there will be a number of sequential payments in most countries. So initial investment in opening accounts for beneficiaries really can pay dividends down the road in terms of efficiency. So a simple immediate action is requiring beneficiaries with existing accounts to register their accounts and to receive their payment through that account. I think regulators and financial sector authorities have a lot of tools in their toolbox, including moral suasion, some incentives, some regulatory powers to require financial service providers to waive fees that might discourage people from having an account-based transfer from an over-the-counter transfer. So account reactivation fees, fees for using third-party ATMs. There's a number of fees that might make someone say, well, I would rather just go and get my cash. So if we can make this transaction a little bit cheaper to do through accounts for beneficiaries, that's very important to do. A key here is, in the short term in particular, is remote account opening. What we want to avoid, for the reasons previously stated, is people going to branches. That's typically how most people will open an account. So it's very important to give a lot of thought into how can we enable remote account opening, including via USSD platforms, people with non-smartphones, so to speak. So they don't, again, have to leave their house. They can open a phone, they can open an account, that money goes into their account, and hopefully they can then pay for some goods and services with electronic payments. And we'll see some interesting examples of that later on. What type of account should you open? Ideally, many countries have in place sort of a basic account, a basic transaction account that has transaction limits, it has limitations on fees, that has very just basic functionality. That's the kind of account that we think is appropriate for this circumstance. So if that account is not already in place in regulation or as an industry standard, it might be worth designing such an account. And again, trying to link enrollment platforms to enable account opening is key. So trying to put all of these processes in one place to facilitate user experience is something that we think is important. So there might be a user portal where the beneficiary goes online, they see they're eligible for the payment, they can say whether or not they have a bank account that exists or not. If they don't have an account, they can have an option to open an account with a number of providers. And then again, they can do all of this without leaving the home. And then on medium term, there's a couple more actions around interoperability. Again, the goal is to build up sort of the digital payment system to, again, reduce the need for people who have accounts to cash out. Okay, one more slide, and then I'll hand over to Vero. On authentication and identification, this is a typical challenge for financial inclusion efforts. How do you make sure that people are who they say they are and can meet the documentation requirements that often come with opening an account? This is particularly relevant in the COVID-19 scenario for two reasons. One is that, as I mentioned before, we want to open accounts remotely as much as possible. So that's an additional challenge. It's not as easy to go to an account, to go to a branch, show your ID and open an account. All this identification, verification, authentication needs to happen online as much as possible or remotely. Second is that, unfortunately, given this massive scale up that's happening in a context where a lot of people are struggling to meet basic needs, there's going to be a huge opportunity for fraud. So we need to put the appropriate protections in place to make sure that the money is going to who it's intended to go to. So there's a few typical tools in our financial inclusion toolbox here, including the use of simplified customer due diligence measures, which means that for simple products with transaction limits, providers are encouraged to accept basic forms of identification and not ask for multiple types of documentation like proof of address, proof of employment. So sort of having these simplified procedures in place is important, and deferring any more complex know your customer requirements to the future. Allowing agents to open accounts is also an important, so people are not crowding branches. Again, the crowding risk can be dispersed across a large number of providers. Extending the validity of expiring IDs is also something relatively quick to do that can help people out. In the short term, facilitating electronic know your customer and online authentication really has to be a key part of the equation to facilitate remote account opening. This is going to require a lot of coordination across authorities, including telecom authorities, ID authorities, social security authorities, each of whom or some of whom manage large ID databases, which in some cases can be cross-checked with mobile number databases to facilitate identification and linkages to mobile numbers to facilitate communication with beneficiaries as well as account opening via mobile platforms. So I'll stop there and pass over to Vera, who will kick us off on country examples. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Doug. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Again, as he mentioned, as Douglas mentioned, I will start the round of country examples. We are going to focus mostly in the immediate actions. We are going to showcase the immediate actions countries have taken so far, and maybe give some glimpses of what type of short-term actions we could foresee them taking or advise them to take, like taking advantage of the current infrastructure they have in their countries regarding financial system infrastructure or social protection infrastructure. So next slide, please. The cases we are gonna see are kind of organized in like from simple to more complex, or from like the first one, Ecuador, is basically in the case of this country, they are using existing channels and systems to deliver the payments. The other two cases are kind of like adding some features and tweaks to include more channels or systems, or are showing more innovation in terms of the platform usage and the way to approach to the different components of the emergency payment mechanism. So I will start with the more simple one. Next, please. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, so when we analyze government payments in general, we have to consider who are the users, what are the payment systems available, what is the mechanism to transfer the money from the agency, the governmental agency that is providing the transfer to the hands of the beneficiary. And for that purpose, we look at the financial system, as Douglas explained, to see what are the providers available, if there are banks, what are the type of point of access available, what are the electronic payment mechanisms available specifically in this crisis, because we want to avoid these physical contact between the financial provider and the beneficiary of the payment. So we have kind of structured a bit the explanation of these country cases, taking into account these three types of stakeholders and contexts. As Douglas was mentioning, users in these type of situations change from the typical users of social protection payments. Like there are new users added to this initial pool, so there is a different profile of the people that is included in this type of emergency payments. Then we have like we have both the same infrastructure in terms of the mechanism from the government to send the payment to the beneficiary, and in terms of on financial system infrastructure. The issue is, as Luz mentioned, that both in the side of the social protection, both on the social protection side and on the financial system side, there are many things to improve even before the crisis that become more relevant during the crisis, and those gaps will be easily shown through the examples. Next slide, please. So in Ecuador, for example, the emergency there were two emergency payments launched by the government, one called Bono de Contingencia, while another one called Bono de Protección Familiar por Emergencia. Both payments target informal workers, self-employed workers under the poverty line whose income is below $400 monthly, and that works in the agricultural sector, construction services, retail sectors, among other. The Bono de Contingencia, which is the one we are showing, we are focusing in this presentation, intend to reach 400,000 people. And the other Bono follow a very similar, like exactly the same process, but like for purposes of the presentation, we are focusing on the Bono de Contingencia. So in terms of the users, we have for this new Bono, new users that like all of them are self-employed workers under the poverty line. So we have to take into account what type of financial access this new user has, and the type of information the social registry in Ecuador can have about them. So in this case, the beneficiaries were identified through the social registry database, and also they managed to get the phone numbers of each beneficiary, but they didn't know much about like what was their profile in terms of financial system customers. So like they didn't find out if they had a bank account or not. They decided to do the transfers using OTC payments, which like don't need the person to have a bank account. In terms of the government platform to make the transfer, in the case of Ecuador, the way they were doing G2P transfers was using, for OTC transfer, they use payment system, a switch, payment infrastructure mechanisms they created specifically for government transfers, which allows the Ministry of Finance to send the money to 8 institutions which are called concentradores. And these 8 institutions can be financial providers or some type of other payment system actor that has within their network they have a financial institutions that are participants. So at the end, these concentradores these 8 institutions that are concentradores allow the system to transfer money through around 3,000 point of access in the normal situation. In the case of the emergency situation of this emergency payment, the government took measures to ease the criteria for the point of access available. And for point of access, by point of access, I'm referring to specifically to agents, banking agents or agents correspondents, and because they relax these criteria and specifically regarding, for example, the time that agent bank that agent has been providing services for the institution, or by relaxing these criteria, they managed to increase significantly the number of access points available for making these emergency payments. So they increased the number from 3,000 to more than 7,000. And these agents and these financial institutions are belong to the financial system, obviously in Ecuador. In Ecuador, the financial system is mainly comprised banks and cooperatives. Cooperatives are the largest in numbers, but banks have a lot of, and cooperatives mainly provide services through branches, while banks have developed the largest agent networks. So for purposes of the transfer of social transfers, usually banks deliver the payment through agents, while cooperatives use branches. In terms of the payment mechanism, people is not so used to digital payment mechanisms. The most common payment mechanism that has already been used by the government has been debit cards, but given the profile of people participating in G2P transfers, that hasn't had much traction, and then there are a lot of things they would need to improve the uptake of debit card, since the emergency payment was focused on elected or choose to be done through an over-the-counter transaction. They didn't include any type of digital payment mechanism for that. So they just were expecting people to go to branches or agent correspondence to attend to get the disbursement. And then also something important to mention here is that the database, these concentrators that have the information on the beneficiaries that is passed by MIES are also connected to the ID registry, which helps them to validate the identity of the beneficiaries. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is more or less the flow of the emergency payment and how the authorities decided to implement it. Since these 400,000 people, since they have the mobile number of these 400,000 people, they sent a test message to notify them that they were eligible. They also complement this text message, this communication mechanism, with providing designing or implementing a site in their website, in the social ministry website, where they could check if they were or not eligible for the benefit. And they also open a exclusive line, a call center, where they could also call and check, verify if they were beneficiaries for this emergency payment. They, as I mentioned, they quickly increase the number of access points available by relaxing some of the criteria for the participating point of access. However, in Ecuador, there are there is potential to use much more point of access, and so on one side we have that there is potential for usage of much more point of access that are not part of the networks of each of these 8 concentrators. And on the other side, we have to consider that in every country, due to this health crisis, many point of access are closing because the person that runs it gets sick. So there is a challenge in keeping this number updated in this point of access functioning. And at the same time, there is a challenge for like when structuring these mechanisms on how to include much more point of access. One way they did it here is relaxing the criteria to select agents like that are already part of these chains of concentrators, but we have also seen that it could have been possible to, there is a barrier in the specific case of Ecuador. There is a barrier for using additional point of access because they don't use validation, identity validation, authentication mechanisms that they don't have, they haven't deployed additional authentication mechanisms that rely on technology such as a token or an OTP that could be used at the agent level to authenticate the identification, to validate the identity of the customer, and they could in that and using that, because they don't use that authentication mechanism, they decided not to use those point of access. But if they would include those that authentication mechanism, those point of access could be added to these 7,000 access points available. Because in Ecuador, the total number of access points is above 30,000 access point. So they are using right now the third part of their total number of access points. Then, well, when as I was explaining, the beneficiary check if they are eligible. They identify which is the access point that is closest to their where they live. And the government also have designed a mechanism to avoid crowding, to avoid crowds in branches or banking agents. And this mechanism is called Pico y Plata. By this mechanism, they use the last number of their ID, and according to that number, they have a specific day or range of day within the month where they can go to the access point to get paid. So if they for example, if their ID finish in number 1, they can only go to receive the payment on the first day of the month, the 11th or the 21st. If the ID finish in number 2, they can only go to get the payment on the second day of the month, on the 12th, or on the 22nd, and so on. In that way, they also like kind of space out the payment across along the month. And the way people get access to the payment is just showing their ID, and as a mechanism for the for the institution that is delivering the payment, they have to sign a document, or they have to put their fingerprint. Then they can receive the payment. Next slide, please. So in terms of opportunities and challenges for the country, well, the fact that they are using just 30% of the total access point obviously shows that they could improve, they could include more access points to the in these mechanisms of payment. These are pictures of like how long the lines are right now to get the subsidies. The picture that is on the lower part of this slide shows the branch of the main public bank that has a presence in different, it has a very wide like they are available in most of the country, even in rural areas. So you can see big lines, but it's not only in branches. You can see big lines in agents too, which is showing the pictures in the upper part of the slide. So definitely there is an opportunity to increase access points, but also increasing access points requires a lot of coordination between the government and financial institutions in order to identify what are the bottlenecks of these lack of availability of access points, and that is really difficult especially in this situation that is because they are running against the time. Maybe they don't want to struggle in debating with other governmental authorities how to do the things. But that's something we are trying to encourage every government, that they need to coordinate, because that's the only way to reach solutions that are really efficient for the public, because this type of delivery is limited by the lack of coordination, by the lack of identification on what are the bottlenecks that they could quickly address. And also there is a need to improve communication channels. They have set up, they have used really good strategies. They have used the website, media in general. They are even sending text to confirm eligibility, which is super good. But then if the customer wants to report an issue or a problem in getting their disbursement, or why they were not eligible, the only mechanism available is the one provided by the Ministry of Economic Development, and that single mechanism is not articulated with the ones that have the financial institutions. So the complaint, the only way for the beneficiaries to report something like that is to call the ministry, and that can be limited by the amount of complaints right now. If they would give an access point where they can report issues at the same financial institution, even like through digital channels, that would really improve the situation of every beneficiary. So I think like from Ecuador, we can like we have learned how they like use their current mechanism for payments to deliver this emergency payment. It was quickly done. They connected. They managed to get the numbers, mobile numbers of all the beneficiaries, which like facilitated the sending the message of eligibility. The big issue is this agglomeration of beneficiaries in the point of access, and there are like many opportunities to improve that, as I was explaining. I will leave you with the with Fiorella, which she will tell about the case of Peru and how they are making some tweaks on the current system to improve access. Fiorella.
Thank you very much, Vero. Hello, everyone. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present the case of Peru. Let me start rapidly giving you some key figures on the country. So Peru has experienced an inclusive growth and reduction of poverty in the last 2 decades, and currently 20% of the population still lives below the poverty line. And one other figure that's very important is that the economy is mainly informal, and almost 70% of the labor force is in the informal sector. And in terms of financial inclusion, Peru is under the Latin American average, and 42% of the adults have an account. So these are some key figures that show how challenging is these G2P payments, and most in the COVID context. So the state of emergency in Peru has been declared, and the lockdown started on March 16th. So the Peruvian government has been taking several measures, including subsidies for poor households through emergency programs. So what we are going to see now is the two main programs that are implemented in the country. So we start with the Bono Yo Me Quedo en Casa, Bono I Stay Home. And so it's a program that offers a transfer equivalent of 50% of the minimum wage, that is around $110, and it targets 2.7 million per household. So they is expected to two payments will be disbursed. Currently, we are in the first payment, and we are in 70% of the beneficiaries of the universe of the sample has collected their bono. So to start, how was the main process? Poor households are identified through the National Household Targeting System, the CISFO, and other administrative databases, such as the Ministry of Health, which determine the most vulnerable and affected regions. In the case of Peru, the regions that are most affected are the urban regions in the capital, Lima, and 2 other big cities in the country. So the government has really quickly response to the emergency, and they used an internet platform that has been adapted to this specific context to review the eligibility for the subsidy. If you can see in the slide in the right hand, you will see what the beneficiary is seeing when he put his ID. So he put his ID into the platform, and then if he's eligible, the platform will provide information about the date, the time, AM or PM, and the place, so the bank branch and the address of the bank branch to collect the bono. So this is in order to try to minimize, to reduce the risk of transmission. And so this platform is being progressively implemented during the time. So we have 2 cases. We have the case where beneficiaries have an account and doesn't have an account. No, for beneficiary without an account, they actually will receive the cash in hand in bank branches, showing just their ID. For beneficiary with an account in Banco de la Nación, who is the state bank, they receive the transfer directly in the account. So there's the beneficiaries actually that are of the social programs as Juntos are almost all of them are banked, and 98% of them have a debit card. So this is an important number. They represent like 700,000 beneficiary of Juntos. So for all of them, the bono has been directly transferred to their account. And for the cash out, so the existing ATM network of the country has been put in place, and Banco de la Nación agent banking. Can we go to the next, please? Next slide, please. Thank you. So for this initiative, we have some key considerations. So the Peruvian government has adapted what they were used to use. So they has adapted the internet platform that actually has used for electoral votes. One thing interesting in this case is that government assigned beneficiary to specific banks branches based on their localization. So as I mentioned, in order to minimize agglomerations and to reduce the risk of transmission of the virus. Something that it's really interesting and that has mentioned Douglas at the beginning of the presentation is the use of agent bankings. So the use of agent bankings in Peru is crucial because they are the channel that is most widespread in the country, as they are like grocery stores, bodegas, pharmacies, it could be a problem in terms of liquidity. So for that, State Bank has provided credit lines, so grant loans to agent banking in order to assure liquidity. So an agent must maintain adequate cash balance to meet beneficiaries' cash out requests. And if there are too many withdrawals, the agent will run out of cash. So this is an important initiative for the government of Peru. And well, according to an agreement, so the coordination between the private sector, the financial sector providers, they agree not to charge fees for ATM withdrawal. Concerning key opportunities, I think that in a lot of countries we have seen that there is an opportunity to improve databases and the validations, to encourage a connection with the national ID registry, that it's really important. Actually, in Peru, it has played a role really interesting, because some percentage of beneficiary has an ID for many reasons, or some 60,000 beneficiary hasn't update actually the state of actually the problem of the disease of beneficiary. So the registry has facilitated online services to allow people to obtain a certificate disease, or to obtain temporary certification for IDs. Another consideration that need to be discussed is the flexibility in assignation of household member beneficiary. Actually, the bono is assigned to the household, but in the case of the Ministry of Development and Social Inclusion, they have allowed women to collect the bono. So this would be maybe a barrier in this emergency context. Finally, it's really important to expand financial services provider. We are here in a context where the 4 biggest banks has participated in the payment of the bono, and the State Bank, but we have much more financial services provider in the country. We are using 5 institutions where the total financial system is composed of around 60 institutions. So this is really important to take into account, because we have seen in Peru that 50%, currently 50% of the agent bankings are now operating. So we have half of the agent bankings operating. And we have seen concerning Banco de la Nación that in the last 4 days, we have seen bank branches, like 10 bank branches closed. So it's really important to extend to other financial services providers. Next, please. Okay, and we have a second bono, but it's a bono that target informal workers that are under the poverty condition, and this is a total and completely different process. So this program is try to reach 718,000 households, and they are receiving the same amount, like $110, And for this subsidy, a new internet platform was implemented to review eligibility. So it's a different platform that we have before. So beneficiary with an account in Banco de la Nación received the transfer on the account, and beneficiary without an account on the Banco de la Nación will receive, this is really interesting, will receive through an message, a code and a link to access Banco de la Nación mobile banking. So when the beneficiary has this code and this link, he dialed the 551 from his cell phone, and they will receive, they will access to an interface where they will input the code they receive and select the withdrawal option. So they key the amount to withdraw, and we receive an OTP that is a one-time password valid for 10 minutes. So they can use this password at Banco de la Nación agents, agent bankings, and Banco de la Nación ATMs. Next, please. So key considerations. So the database is connected in this initiative, in this program, to the National ID Registry. It's important to notice that information on cell phone numbers is gated. So this is important because it will allow a communication further with beneficiary, but essentially because if there is a second payment that will be implemented, it will be easier for Banco de la Nación to send the same system. It is not necessary to go to the bank branch, so it's allowed to avoid crowd and to do our operations and to receive the amount at home. So this is really interesting. And we have also the USSD technology incorporated. So when we dial the 551, we can dial with a smartphone or not. So this is really interesting. We have identified some opportunity as well. As I mentioned, this is different platform. This is a different mechanism. So I think that we need to reinforce public coordination and private coordination also. Even if this is an emergency situation, we can be more efficient by joint efforts in this context. Expanding financial services here is really necessary. We have seen that this is just Banco de la Nación, so the state bank, who is participating in this disbursement, in this payment. So we really need to expand to other financial services providers to try to spread to give beneficiaries more access point and enable customer choice. So here we just have a Banco de la Nación choice. And something that was really interesting also is to ensure technological capacity. So what we have seen in a few days ago is that the mobile banking interface of Banco de la Nación stopped working. And it stopped working due to generation of many passwords that lasted 10 minutes. So Banco de la Nación decided to extend the password from the password duration from 10 minutes to 2 days, in order to avoid this technological problem. This is the Peruvian example. I think that the government will continue learning and improving along the way. Thank you. So we will continue with Colombia. Guillermo, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. We wanted to present the case of Colombia because, as it was pointed out by my colleagues, this is another model that is being deployed and that leverages the existing digital payments ecosystem. So this will be also an opportunity to financially include all the beneficiaries that are receiving the cash transfer. One clarification before we start with the case is that Colombia has put in place other 5 programs to support the COVID crisis, and but we picked this one particularly because of the usage of the digital payments ecosystem. Next slide, please. So the program is called Ingreso Solidario. It has been implemented by the National Planning Department, and the Financial Regulatory Unit has played a very important role here. The program consists in basically 2 payments. The first payment, which was already disbursed, is of approximately USD $40, and the second payment will be disbursed of $20 to 3 million families. These are families that had not received social payment before. The process follows these steps. First, there is the creation of a database of potential beneficiaries using the social registry, which is complemented with information from the Ministries of Finance, Health, and Labor databases. The information of the potential beneficiaries is then cross-checked with financial institutions. So financial institutions can identify who of these beneficiaries have active accounts in the financial system. In this case, the intention of the government of Colombia is to disburse the payments through a banking account. So and also to the account to be linked to a digital payments mechanism, which could be in this case a mobile wallet. In this case, as we know, there are some restrictions in terms of the technology that beneficiaries have in hand. So the Colombian government works as well with the mobile network operators for 2 purposes. First, to identify if the beneficiaries have a mobile number in the databases of the mobile network operators, and second, to identify the type of connectivity that each device have. They divided basically the connectivity between 4G, 3G for the smartphones, and 2G for other type of phones, more simple phones. Well, once they had the complete database and they had already identified who of the beneficiaries have an active account in the financial system, and also they have identified the type of hardware that the beneficiaries having had, what they do is that they notify to users that have an active account through an SMS that they will receive the transfer in their active account. If beneficiaries don't have an active account, what happens is the following. For 4G and 3G users, which are ones that will be able to download and operate an application or a mobile wallet, these beneficiaries are notified through an SMS, and the link is provided to download the app and open an account on the mobile wallet. This is possible because Colombia has also implemented the simplified customer due diligence process, which allows to beneficiaries to only input a few information in order to open the account, and also they have implemented the remote opening of accounts, which is also that it's very helpful. So beneficiaries don't have to go to a branch and open an account and then use the mobile wallet. One of the features of the wallets that was very important for the Colombian government was that the wallet, as we know, wallets can allow to carry out transfers to business and merchants or to persons, but also these apps has the possibility of using one-time passwords. As my colleagues explained, one-time passwords is something that you request to your bank, so you can go to an ATM or an agent and withdraw money without having a card. In the case of the 2G users, some banks in Colombia have already in place USSD platforms that could be accessed through these type of phones. So the process is the same. They are notified through an SMS and must open an account using the USSD technology, and transfers and OTP is also available on these channels. Next slide, please. Some key considerations on the Colombia case is that beneficiaries are previously identified by the government. It is in some other cases, the beneficiaries apply and they receive a response if they are able to receive the subsidy or not. And a very important one is that the government assigns beneficiaries to specific banks based on the infrastructure of each bank to spread out payment points and avoid agglomerations. In this case, what happens? So Colombian authorities review the installed capacity of each bank, and they assign a specific number of beneficiaries based on the capacity of each bank for cashing out the subsidy. As we have discussed, this is very important to spread out the cash outs and to avoid agglomerations. So this was an important measure. However, it could be improved in later stages when the Colombian government maybe permits beneficiaries to choose which bank they will be using for receiving the subsidy. Also, as we commented, there is a leverage of the existing digital payments ecosystem, which in this case includes basic accounts, which are open through simplified customer due diligence, and also that they can be opened remotely. One of the opportunities that we have identified for the Colombia case is the improvement of the social registry database. On the beginning, it was hard to target and to identify who will be receiving the subsidy. So that would be it for the case of Colombia. Can we move now, please, to the case of Jordan? Next slide, please. The case of Jordan is very similar to the case of Colombia in terms of that the government is trying to leverage also the digital payments ecosystem that has been built for many years. On this case, the particular program we're focusing on is one deployed by the National Aid Fund, which will deliver to 200,000 families an estimated of $192 US per month for households with 4 or more. In the case of households, will be delivered an amount of $48 per household member. This emergency program will be continuing for the next 6 months. The process is very similar to the one that was carried out by authorities in Colombia. The beneficiaries are selected from the NAF database, which includes socioeconomic data for almost 1 million households that apply to the Takaful cash transfer program, and more recently to the bread subsidy compensation program. The NAF updates administrative information on households and individual members automatically using the National Unified Registry, which includes data for multiple government entities. NAF, in this case, once they identify the beneficiaries of the program, will send text messages to the beneficiaries requesting them to select their preferred PSP wallet provider to receive the support. In this case, in Jordan, there are currently 7 providers that provide this type of service. Beneficiaries then, without well, the beneficiaries that don't have e-wallets are also requested to choose one among all the PSPs available. Once beneficiaries have elected the PSPs, NAF compiles a list of all the beneficiaries and the respective PSPs to follow for the PSPs to follow up and assist in open the wallet. NAF then disburses or transfers the benefit to each PSP, and beneficiaries are also able to carry out cash outs and also transfers. A few considerations on this program that are not totally related to the G2P program, but that certainly facilitated the implementation, is that the Central Bank of Jordan relaxed its current regulations to the 6 licensed payment service providers. So beneficiaries could open a wallet online with a simplified KYC requirement. Also, a platform that's called JomoPay that interconnects the wallet is used in this case, and the Central Bank of Jordan mandated that all the 7 PSP providers interoperate in this platform, so different users can, so money can be transferred to users with different PSPs. The central bank has also dropped or has reduced the interchange fee structure, which interchange fee means the amount of money that is being paid between the providers of the scheme, and that also indirectly benefits the customers because it has effects on price reductions, and also increase the amount that can be put into a wallet. So that will be it on the cases of Colombia and Jordan. Now I will pass to Silvia.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. So let us move on to what we have seen are key success factors. And let me also mention that we were given another 10 minutes for the end of the webinar, so you can ask your questions, and I will try to move through the success factors rather quickly. Still, I encourage you to share your questions in the chat, and then we can also come back to you after the webinar personally. So if you move to the next slide, please. We are identifying that there are 8 key success factors that make payments delivery in emergencies more successful. And so one is the collaboration between the public and the private sectors. And this is at the public sector amongst the financial sector regulators and policymakers, the social protection sector. We also heard the ID agencies and telcos who might have telephone numbers of recipients. So the collaboration is really important and can really contribute to the success of this at the public level, but also between public and private sector. Collaborating with your financial sector helps a lot in making payments work better. Another success factor are the distribution networks. As we heard, it's important that the money can be distributed to those people in both urban as well as rural areas. And so the importance of a wide-reaching network of cash out points, of access points, is really important. And for that, you can use both financial distribution networks, but also non-financial, as we're seeing in some countries. They're leveraging e-commerce providers and let's say Ubers in order to provide cash out. Another aspect is customer choice. Here, it's really about the convenience for recipients to access their money and access it in a way that is most appropriate for their needs. And also what we heard, there might be different types of cash transfers, and then you receive each transfer with a different solution. It's important to implement choice so recipients can choose to possibly receive all types of transfers they are receiving through the same solution and the same account. It is also helping a lot for social distancing by spreading the amount of cash out points and giving choice to recipients that they can go to a diverse set of access points, and therewith we can reduce social crowding. This, of course, also requires interoperability. So in some cases, regulators and the financial sector has advanced interoperability in this case, which is also one of the short to medium term solutions to expand the range and increase customer choice. As Guillermo just mentioned now also about Colombia, and it's also the case in Ecuador and in Peru and in all the other countries that we are looking at, customer authentication is key to make sure that the right recipient receives their money. It has also helped for involvement. When there is the opening of accounts or of wallets involved, then authentication is key also for identifying the customer and doing the due diligence when opening accounts. Then the fifth aspect that we see has been key is having connected systems, especially public systems, information systems that can combine the ID information with people's banking information, telephone numbers, but also with the social registry. So we have heard, for example, in Colombia, this has been key to the success, but also in Jordan, Guillermo just mentioned, they were able to leverage their unique ID system in order to identify recipients. Effective communication and recourse channels are key to make this work for recipients. They need to know where they can go and what the alternatives are. They also need a channel to ask when there's a problem or when they encounter fraud. And I saw that already in the questions mentioned that fraud is also a key risk in this time. And so communication really helps to reduce fraud, and recourse is particularly important. Effective communication and recourse also helps for monitoring and documenting lessons learned and identifying what other problems are there in order to improve it in the future. Then the use of mobile technology has really helped to make contactless payments and to expand the access points. It can also help to reduce the need to cash out. So where there are mobile payment solutions, these can be leveraged and can significantly improve the response. And the last point is really important, as my colleagues already mentioned. Liquidity, for example, is very difficult to manage, especially in these times where many people come at the same time and try to cash out money. So the operations and the business models at the cash out points need to be supported for liquidity management and also for keeping open and being incentivized to serve recipients. So let's move to the next two slides. Please go one more. I will skip that one. And just say the last one, which is how can governments work on building systems that are more prepared for this type of circumstances? And CCAP has done quite a bit of work on this, on how governments can design systems that allow multiple programs to plug into a shared system, a shared payment system that is used by a multitude of providers and can therewith offer a multitude of access points for recipients. And the key outcome of that is to provide choice and convenience for recipients. It also offers much more efficiency for governments. But of course, in order to develop these type of systems and this shared infrastructure, it takes a longer term approach. It takes to build up the connected systems, a shared payment system, and making sure that different providers and programs can plug into that. And I encourage you to look on the CCAP website and read our paper on the future of G2P payments to learn a little bit more about that. And with that, I will turn it back to Luz to moderate some of the question and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you all the panelists. Thank you to the audience for sticking with us. So yeah, we have a good number of questions. I'm sure that we are not going to be able to answer them all, but as promised before, we will be circulating like a written document with the answers for your questions. So one initial question for Sylvia is, what's the difference between G2P and cash transfer? When did the G2P term emerged? Sylvia, you are mute, I think. No. We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now.
Yeah. So G2P stands for government to people payments. So it's basically about bulk payments from one to many people. And G2P basically arises from the fact that governments are increasingly shifting their social protection from in-kind support to cash transfers, given that there is more autonomy for recipients to use the money in the ways that are most valuable to them and how they need it. And cash transfers, of course, apply to many types of transfers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the government. It can also be transfers by a humanitarian agency, or it can be also businesses that transfer wages. And in this case, the response to COVID-19 has really largely been in the area of social protection payments, social safety net payments from the government, and that is where we refer to as G2P.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. And a new question for Fiorella. Due to COVID-19 lockdowns, there are now new beneficiaries that need to be reached, for example, informal workers. What are some good approaches that reduce exclusion while also addressing fraud? This is a question from Celine, and maybe you can bring some of the examples from Peru.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Actually, I don't have the right answer. This is really difficult to understand. It really depends on the availability of databases that the country has. For the example of Peru, we have beginning with the database of the registry of the beneficiaries of social programs, but we have also crossed databases from other institutions. Maybe one that has a more utility is the data of the superintendency of banks, because this superintendency has the estimation of income that is gathered by financial institution and actually microfinance institutions and bank institutions. So with this data, we could maybe estimate a little bit more and try to be closer to independent and informal workers.
Thank you, Fiorella. And one question for Guillermo. Why in Ecuador, why is the switch concentrador at MIES instead of at the central bank? This is a question from our colleague Miriam.
Yes, of course. Well, in Ecuador, we have to take into account some issues. First, the payments infrastructure that is available for the central bank is not real time. So that will be a first challenge in terms of deploying the subsidies. The second one is how to reach people, because in this case, the switch concentrador, the main feature is that it allows for financial institutions to connect to the MIES database. So in this case, agents have a specific connection to the database and are able to immediately identify if a person that is coming to cash out a subsidy is eligible of the subsidy, it has a subsidy pending of cashing out, and this is done very quickly. Of course, there are some areas of improvement currently, as it was mentioned by Veronica. There is no authentication in terms of of cashing out at agencies. So that would be why right now the government is choosing to build on this infrastructure. And also important to say that in Ecuador they have for regular G2P, they have another mechanism that allows to use the central bank infrastructure to send money from the government to accounts opened by beneficiaries at financial institutions. In this case, as it was mentioned, challenge is again how fast is the central bank to disburse. Also, the challenge of opening accounts, and in this case, I want to also take some information from the Colombia experience. In Colombia, the whole mechanism was put in place in only 2 weeks. That's because there was a whole infrastructure already built around the digital payments ecosystem that could be leveraged. For instance, for one example, the infrastructure that allows for transfers is already put in place. It's called Transfilla, and it connects the 6 wallets that are also participating in the program. And this is something that we are still that we are also seeing in Ecuador, that is currently in a phase of development. So in this case, the decision has also a component of how developed is the financial infrastructure in each country.
Thank you, Guillermo. And we have another question, probably the final one, because we are short of time, but it's an open question. I don't know who wants to take it, but it's, will combining the G2P benefits in form of money and in kind be effective? Thinking about people who have the money but cannot spend the money since the shops are closed or have difficulties in getting, for example, groceries. What is your take on combining benefits? Maybe Sylvia, do you want to answer that question, or Douglas?
Well, I can briefly say that there are countries where they are including also in-kind support, and in cases where markets are not functioning well enough anymore, then I think government does have to provide in-kind assistance, especially to enable people to get access to food and to essential goods. However, where possible and where markets are still functioning, it is preferable to use cash, because as I was mentioning, it allows people to choose what they want, and it also enables, again, the markets, the local markets, to function and to get still some business.
And if I could slip in, Luz, one final question that I saw that I really liked on consumer protection. The idea is that we're having a lot of people come into the formal financial system who don't have a lot of experience. So we need to make sure there are robust consumer protections in place to protect them. Of course, countries spend years building legal regulatory frameworks and supervisory capacity for consumer protection, but there are a few sort of basic things you can do to ensure good disclosure, transparency of products, to prevent abusive practices, to ensure dispute resolution and build financial capability. So one is around key fact statements for basic accounts, a very short summary of what are the key features and prices that come with an account that somebody might be signing up for to receive their payment. 2, around business practices. Supervisors have a big responsibility here to monitor social media, to look for where there are potentially recurring abusive practices, whether it's in an ATM or a branch or an agent, to monitor that in real time and address it as fast as possible. For dispute resolution, we've mentioned having sort of hotlines or chatbots or web platforms to quickly resolve disputes. And then on building financial capability, making sure there's sort of a simple brochure that's maybe available via the enrollment platform or circulated along with an SMS that's sent to beneficiaries is also important. For agents in particular, very quickly, it's important that financial service providers are liable for the actions of their agents, but agents themselves can actually be a very good conduit into the financial sector because they're based in the community, they have a lot of trust, they speak the language. So those are just a few ideas. Thanks.
Thank you, Douglas, and thank you all for joining us today. We managed to have more than 100 people during the whole webinar. So we invite you to join the next webinar on April 16. We will share with you the answers to your questions. We have a lot of more things to share, and we will keep connected through sp.org, socialprotection.org, and also through our uh, emails. So please contact us, and thank you again for joining us today. Thank you, everybody.